Yeah. My name's Hugh Marshall from Talking Wales, and we're joined today by Tom Cohen from Oasis in Cardiff.
Hi, good to be on again, Hugh.
Thank you. And Susheta is a journalist who's been working with Talking Wales in the last few weeks, looking at the localities of Caerau, also Caerffili. So before we start, I'll just give you a quick introduction of what Talking Wales is.
We're building a community and we want you to be part of it. A news and information service designed to keep Welsh citizens informed, a space where issues that matter and impact our daily lives can be discussed, developing ideas and challenging those in power. Sharing news and information via digital radio, YouTube, social media and online. Using clear, understandable language. On the platforms you use most often. It'll be owned by you, our members. Serving all of Wales and its people wherever they are in the world. Join us on our journey and help us create a better Wales.
Right, so we're going to be discussing the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation. It's been in the news this week that England has published their latest update of the Index of Multiple Deprivation with council wards in England. Since 2019, many of the same council wards feature in the latest release, suggesting it's an endemic problem. And Wales will publish their update in 3 weeks, and the same council wards will likely feature amongst the top 20. Susheta, you've done some work around the Welsh Index. Can you explain a bit what it's about?
Yeah. So, as you said, that it's a Welsh government's measure to rank different areas that are deprived, and it's a fairly small area. The average population is about 1,600 people. So Wales has 1,909 wards, which are known as LSOA, which is the lower layer super output areas. As I said, the population is around 1,600, and it has various domains on which it measures the development. Those 8 domains are specifically income, employment, health, education, access to service, community safety, physical environment, and housing. Taking all these domains into consideration, this index has been created, and the English Index of Multiple Deprivation has just been out, and we are waiting for the Welsh Index Multiple Deprivation Report of 2025, which is due in 3 weeks. The areas that we are specifically looking at, Caerau, Tylerstown, and St. James Caerffili, have consistently ranked amongst the top most deprived wards in Wales. Talking of St. James in Caerffili, it has been in the top 9 most deprived wards in Wales since 2008. Caerau has been consistently ranking the worst in terms of health and subsequently other domains. So what we need to look at is that why are these consistently ranked lower? And certainly it's not a one-time issue, but definitely it's more systemic and structural and needs to be addressed holistically.
Thank you for explaining that. It's really an issue, and I think what we need to remember as well is it's not a sort of exact science on a league table, but it does give a message around these areas. So when you visited us, what did you discover?
Let's talk about how we got there. So I don't drive, and the trains were the only means. And then Hugh very considerately picked me up from my steg, from where the train was, and took me to Caerau to do the investigation. So getting there was definitely a big challenge, which we discovered that people living in Caerau have been facing for a long time. And we know that it was a mining industry, a coal mining industry primarily, And ever since the industries dwindled, not much economic activity has been going on there. And connectivity, transport connectivity has been a major issue. Uh, Getting there was difficult, one. And talking of diversity, I think I counted two people of color when I was there. And uh, we know that immigration has been flagged as a major problem in what is holding back the development, which doesn't necessarily seem to be the case upfront. When we were talking to the people there, not much investment has gone into developing commercial activities in Cairo, which has kept it deprived. Consequently, many people are depending upon charities and food banks to meet their daily needs. And these are people we see in everyday lives around us. These are proper working people, they have a day job. And if they can't afford day to day activities and lifestyle, let alone people who are somewhat more deprived, say disabled, who are elderly. And talking to another member of Zoe, she works with the Caira Development Trust, and she's a deputy manager. She sees these problems upfront on a daily basis, but she doesn't. As much as she's hopeful of the future of Caira, she doesn't want her children to grow up there because there isn't much opportunity university wise, career wise, education wise. And we need to see how the children were affected because they are the future of Caira. And Caira is primarily youthful. It has more youthful population than the Welsh average. So we do need to provide them opportunities, which we don't see at the moment. So yeah, that's my Kara, that it's in desperate need of more investment and more job opportunities, training opportunities. Yeah.
It's such a strong, amazing community with such lovely, beautiful people that everyone looks out for each other. Everyone goes above and beyond for each other. And I think that's the most important thing about living here and being part of this community, is that you don't feel deprived of anything.
Yeah, and you can see the video in full and read the article discussion that was written around Caerau by visiting talkingwales.co.uk. Thomas, if I continue, do you want to just explain, obviously, your work in Oasis, or you're working with people who are living in potentially deprived communities? In something like Cardiff, in the city centre, how has sort of deprivation and sort of poverty impacting people there?
Yeah, so Oasis supports refugees and asylum seekers in Cardiff and in the surrounding areas, predominantly at the moment. We've seen a change in UK government policy where asylum seekers traditionally were housed in the four main cities in Wales and are now also being moved into more rural areas like Caerau, I'm sure, as well. And it's really having an impact. As you'll know, asylum seekers receive around £45 to £47 a week, and the cost of living, which everyone's suffering through at the moment, is hitting people hard. And yeah, it seems like a very challenging time at the moment for people in general. And with the Senate election next year, it's a particularly interesting time for politics in Wales. And yeah, we're seeing the ramifications of that policy campaign coming into effect now with the recent by-election. And it really feels like the cost of living and immigration as two issues are going to focus heavily.
Yeah, because it's interesting you mentioned immigration there, because one of the things that that we found obvious from from visiting these places that I've mentioned it earlier. And I was in Caerffili around the time of the by-election, and I have to say, Caerffili, I was shocked. I don't think I've seen anywhere so white. It was bizarre. It's got 98% of the population are white, British, English. Obviously, the immigration had any impact on why people are living in communities that are struggling. And also, if you go back to 2014, it's the same communities as St James in Caerffili, Tylerstown, Caerau, sort of 10, 11 years ago, still on the top of those, and that was before we had all the nonsense around small boats. But it's a worrying trend, isn't it? People are sort of using immigration reforms to the platform almost exclusively based on immigration. I'm sure people will see the viral from the BBC Wales debate when a mother of a mixed race boy made the point that she didn't feel safe in the community that she was sort of brought up and lived in, and she pointedly blamed home. So since they've locked up, they have had instances of that. And I think the other thing is you find that majority of people who are immigrants statistically are either coming here to study or to work, and all of those people are working in health and social care. Again, another worrying statistic in the last 12 months, the use of hospital staff has increased by 50%. Again, personal experience, I've been in hospital in Bridgend a few times in 2 years. I was able to go having my gallbladder removed. Once again, as with all the previous occasions, I was on a ward. It was all white Welsh men over 50, and the immigrants who were looking at us. So there is disturbing. Thomas, have you seen a change in people's attitudes to the people that you work with? Are they more fearful now from the rhetoric being bandied about?
Yes, I think absolutely more fearful. It certainly felt like the riots in 2024 were a big changing point. I think up until then it was maybe sort of gradually moving off the back of Brexit towards it being more hostile to people that are not born in Britain, or what some people would perceive as somebody not looking British, which unfortunately for certain people is somebody that isn't white. So it has been a worrying time. Certainly in the last year, we've seen some worrying trends. Anecdotally, some of our clients bringing stories to us about hate crimes that they've experienced in the street, but also worryingly hate crimes that their children have suffered from other pupils in school, and that's as young as in primary school. It's really all ages that we're seeing increases in this, and it feels like we're in a space where it's a bit more acceptable, unfortunately, to have certain racist views. It's the language being used by politicians across the board, to be honest, is quite dehumanizing a lot of the time. And I think when people see politicians using languages that are not the norm, I think they feel more emboldened to use it themselves. And I think the immigration debate is really being jumped on by certain political parties to, touching on what Susheta said, use immigrants as a scapegoat to what is quite just systemic and wider issues going on in Wales and the UK.
And it's really, when you talk about children, suffering abuse from other pupils, people aren't born racist. It's something that they learn, and in general from their parents, the environment they're growing up in. It's strange, the normalisation of racist. Growing up in the 70s, I remember back in those days, being racist. There were people, who were racist. That sort of disappeared when people realised that it was wrong. But it seems to be still, there's a group now, and it's quite a substantial group who do believe that racism. So Shetta, you're from India and you're living in Cardiff. Have you seen a difference at the time that you've been here in Wales?
Unfortunately, yes. And so we come here thinking it's a first world country and it's much better than where we are coming from, and we'll have equal opportunities. And sadly, that was not the case. The bubble was burst sooner or later. Uh, it's not, we see, I mean, because I'm so visibly different, you can just see eyes turning now and then, and for not so good reasons. And it was not long ago. Perhaps it was August last year that I was denied a house, citing that I'm an Indian. That's very much on record, and we have taken up the case. But that's that, and it's sadly it's more frequent than I would like to admit. The racism, overt or hidden, that I face day to day, and I mean, it feels like I have to prove every step that I am worthy of living here as much as you are. But because, as you said, that because of how visibly different I am, so it's just appalling and really sad.
And it's, as you say, it's one of those things that it's difficult to understand. And I think the other thing is obviously the fact that political parties are almost pandering to the rhetoric. There's very little discussion around why we need immigration. We have an aging population who need care and attention. But that it's almost as if every party, from Labour, Conservatives, are just trying to sort of jump on reform's coattails and show how extreme they are. Can you just explain? Because obviously you're here on a limited visa. So for you to remain in the UK from next year on, what do you need to do in order to stay here?
Right. So I came here as a student. So then I was on a student visa, and then we have graduate routes. So I have something called PSW, that is post-study work visa, which I'm currently on. It's 2 years from my studies, and this is specifically a period for us to look for jobs and stay here, do the work, which is due to expire in February 2026, and that is when I have to go back to India. One of the routes that I can stay here is to get a sponsored job, and the threshold salary for that is around 34 grand a year, and which is a good amount of money to make. And sadly, my field doesn't pay me that much. So I mean, it's just that how difficult it is to reach the goal post, and it's seemingly ridiculous how challenging these criterias are, how challenging these criteria are to meet, and not many can meet that.
Because as you say, so £34,000.
Yeah.
Working in journalism these days, you're lucky to be earning over 25,000 a year, because it's so very badly paid industry. Thomas, do you see, is that something that you find the sort of people you're working with worry about, is that they're seeing almost like a ticking clock until they have to basically go back to where they came from?
The majority of the people that we help are seeking asylum or have had their refugee status, and there's different rules that essentially manage that. So if somebody is granted refugee status, they have the right to remain in the UK for 5 years. and they can work and claim benefits during that time. And after that 5 years is up, they could apply for indefinite leave to remain. The rules are different around the refugee system, because fundamentally those people that are granted refugee status are not able to go back to their home country because it's not safe. But I would say that certainly we saw it with the Rwanda policy in the previous government, and also with the new Labour government. The rules around migration in general, but also with refugee status, are ever changing. It's becoming even more difficult to know where you stand. We saw recently the family reunion route being paused by the UK government, and that's a route whereby somebody that is granted refugee status in the UK can bring their family from their home country or from another country where they are. So it might be their spouse and their children to the UK safely and legally. And that's being paused at the moment. There isn't any indication from the government when that will start again. And that's just one example of where the UK government is continually at the moment trying to tweak the immigration rules to, I think, solve an issue that isn't there. I don't think. I think people. It's okay to be concerned about immigration, but I don't think that's the route to solving the issues that we've got at the moment. And making these minor changes aren't really going to change anything in the grand scheme of things. So,
a question to both of you: why do you think immigration has become this hot topic? You go back, a few years. I remember, I've been following politics, and the things that people were most concerned about were the economy, health service, education. Those are all the things. And now immigration is at that top point. But it's that understanding of what immigration is. There was an astonishing poll number that 47% of people in the UK think that immigration is based on small boat crossings, when it's actually, 2-3%? And as I say, the rest are coming here to work or studies, so they're contributing to our societies. So why do you think that has, immigration has become this topic? Is it just purely division for, sort of right-wing politicians to try and capitalise on? Shetta?
Yeah, I think it's a part of a larger systemic problem, and clearly immigration is the easy scapegoat to put the blame on. And as if you recall, Zoe, the deputy manager of Caerau Development Trust, says, we really can't blame anyone for the lack of job opportunities that were never there in the first place. So it's not about the immigrants are coming and taking our jobs. There weren't jobs in the first place. And if anything, immigrants are giving back more to the economy than they are taking. I have some stats in front of me that in 2023, there was huge investments in health by the UK government, like it should. 212 billion pounds went into health, 141 billion pounds went into pensions, and only a very small paltry sum of 3 billion pounds went into asylum and immigration. Now, that is a separate debate, but to say that, like you said, that a staggering over 40% people believe that immigration is one of the greatest problems that UK is facing. That is just a made-up issue to divert the focus from the main issue, which is money laundering, tax evasion, and stuff like that. Immigrants, asylum seekers, refugees are the easy blame. They're the easy scapegoat, and that's where the problem is. I really believe that.
Yeah, Thomas, what do you think?
Yeah, I really agree with Susheta there, that I think immigrants have become a very easy scapegoat for several political parties. we see it in Wales at the moment in the run up to the election. One of Reform's big policies is to say they would scrap the nation of sanctuary policy, which is set up to essentially ease the transition for people that have claimed asylum and are restarting their lives in Wales. And that's something they've really been hammering home. But actually, the nation of sanctuary policy represents 0.05% of the whole Welsh Government budget, £55 million per year. The majority of that money, which was spent on the Ukraine scheme, which doesn't seem to get the same bad rap as other types of asylum. So I think that's really one example that highlights where, saying and talking about immigration as a big issue is not going to solve the problem of the cost of living and people feeling, hard done by there not being enough jobs. Because even if you, as Susheta said, the asylum system costs around £3, I think, to maybe £5 billion a year in the UK. If that stopped entirely tomorrow and you had that extra £5 billion to put into public services, it would help in some areas, but really it would make such a small difference when the whole UK budget is 1,200 billion. That 5 billion is not going to go very far at all. So I think it's just an easy solution. It's easy to say that we'll get rid of immigration and everything will be perfect.
Because it's interesting, because Brexit is one of those things, and it's interesting that the Labour government is only now they're starting to sort of talk about it because you can see factually it's been a disaster. One of the reasons the small boat crossing started was because obviously we lost those return schemes with all the other European countries. So it's quite bizarre. It's something that people like Farage campaign so strongly for has actually caused the issue, but they're not willing to take any responsibility for that. And the other thing, obviously, is how many people went back to Europe who were working in things like health and social care. Because what's interesting, I think, if you see, I live in the Caerau Valley, so the people who were working in the care homes, they were Polish, Romanian, but they looked like you and me, Thomas. So unless you heard people speak, then you wouldn't know, where they were from. What we're seeing now is, those people have been replaced in a large part by people from Africa. So we're seeing, people from there, but they're more obvious that they're from. But what's interesting, when you see those people out and about, they're wearing medical uniforms, so you can see that they are carers, they are working in hospitals. But it was interesting in Caerffili, the nation of sanctuary. Do you think there's an issue around communication? So obviously one of the things we're trying to do with Talking Wales is try to explain to people what's going on in Wales. I think the nation of sanctuary, it's a good thing. It hasn't cost a lot. Plaid Cymru campaigned in a positive manner on that, and they actually benefited from being positive about it. But do you think there's an issue around communicating, government policies and basically the facts around immigration? Because I think the last time you were on with us, we had somebody from the Migration Observatory, and they were saying, that what people think and the actual numbers are completely different, and yet you never hear that from, even places like the BBC.
Yeah, I do think that's an issue. And, that statistic about 0.05% of the Welsh Government budget being nation of sanctuary is actually from a recent press release from the Welsh Government, where I think they were acting in response to what has been, I think, a lack of clear communication in terms of really what the nation of sanctuary is. Because fundamentally, that small amount of money being used from the budget to help refugees and asylum seekers in Wales, yes, it's to help them with the transition, but fundamentally it's things like English classes, support routes into employment, making sure that people can transition from being an asylum seeker in the Home Office providing housing and financial support to then moving into refugee status, where they're under the same system as everyone else. And it's there to make sure that people can best integrate into the community. They can find jobs. They don't need to rely on benefits as much if they're learning English and are ready for work when they get their refugee status. So it's really there not as a luxury by any stretch of the imagination, but as a vital intervention that people that have fled war and persecution need to make sure that they can restart their lives in Wales as soon as possible.
Yeah, because it's interesting. We've seen lots of examples of Ukrainian families, particularly mothers with children who fled Ukraine as their husbands were fighting the war, and many of those Ukrainian children learning to speak Welsh and going to Welsh medium schools. And it's integrating into not just sort of English speaking Wales, but into Welsh speaking Wales. And again, Wales has no control over immigration, because one of the clips that was has had a big effect in Wales was, I think it was Sioned Williams, the Plaid Senedd member, talking about the nation of sanctuary and talking about Palestinians, again, who were facing attacks, and lots of women and children have been murdered there. But this misrepresentation that 1.5 million Palestinians were going to be coming to Wales, and isn't it astonishing that people can't see through that, because it's quite clearly never going to happen, isn't it?
It's not, in that form. You would hope that people would be able to see through it, but I think it's really on people to research facts, and also to take time to listen to things in long form. I think it's more and more we're seeing 10-second, 20-second video clips online that take something out of context or give very binary choices for things. And I think I do think the politicians have a big role to play in explaining how everything works, and particularly immigration in Wales, because like you said, Hugh, although we've got the nation of sanctuary, the Welsh government does not have any control over immigration. So for asylum and wider immigration, so it's really on. Certainly, I think it's on the third sector as well, public services, and everyone to put out the facts and to explain things fully.
Yeah, because again, it's quite interesting. You talk there about communication and getting people to explain, more about, what's going on in Wales. So we intentionally called this broadcast the immigration problem, because it's constantly being framed as a problem, but nobody says what the problem is. Some people, who are racist, think that it's, going to ruin their communities and it's changing the face of the place they lived in. I was in Cardiff on last week having a coffee in the middle of the city centre. Cardiff's one of the most multicultural cities, historically in the UK. It goes back many, many years. And you could just see people were just people, they were just getting on with their lives, and everybody getting on with each other. But it's interesting how in places where, like Caerffili, that things like, immigration was a subject that people were latching onto when there is none there. But so we've discussed obviously around the issues and stuff. But what are the solutions? So, Stacheta, when you spoke to people in Caerau and then latterly in Caerffili, what were they telling you about what the solutions they need for those communities?
We've touched upon immigration, but surprise, surprise, immigration doesn't factor at all in solutions. What I mean to say is that we need to create jobs. So create jobs irrespective of immigration status. Immigrants, if they are helping you get the jobs, say if there is a certain community group in, say, a smaller town, they are helping with the jobs, say with health and public services, medical services. So what I mean to say is just create jobs for people irrespective of their ethnicity. And Zoe talked about creating more training opportunities for the youth to learn skills. And of course, more care has to be given, and in providing homes and retrofitting them and creating short courses for people, improving the health of people, improving employability, improving the mental health. It's sort of all linked. And I think the prime uh, way to get out of the poverty is to invest in the area more, create more commercial activities, create more jobs, attract people, attract investments, and attract the youth to stay there and do something more for the places in Caerau, Tylerstown, and Caerffili, so
So,
that they have a future to look forward to.
so Councillor Adam Rhys Davis is an independent councillor in Caerau, because he had some, interesting opinions, and he did have solutions. What were the things he was saying?
Yeah, again,
Oh, we seem to have lost Susheta. Hopefully come back now in a minute. So yeah, so Thomas, from that perspective again, around solutions, for the work that you do, but in general, what can be done and what needs to be done.
Yeah, I think Susheta's right. There needs to be massive investment in public services. I'm in the charity I work for, we don't really talk about economic policy. Is probably outside of our scope, but there certainly does need to be significant public investment in the UK and in Wales. I do think there's things that can be done around community cohesion and community tensions, and certainly some of the work that we're doing is we've got a project that is engaging asylum seekers in volunteering opportunities that they want to get involved within the community, bringing people that have come to the UK to claim asylum together with people that were born in Britain and have grown up here together. And like you said, Hugh, when you were having a coffee in Cardiff, it's actually showing that we are all just people, and actually there's not as much difference between us than you might think, because certainly in some of those more rural places, people will talk about immigration, and they will talk about people that have come to the UK on small boats having understandably, because there's not much immigration in those areas, never met somebody that falls into that bracket. And actually what we find is when we bring asylum seekers and refugees into events with the British public, actually it's really enriching, and there's a nice bit of sharing of culture and far more of a shared understanding actually after the events that we are all just people trying to make the most of our lives.
Yeah, and when you look at Wales as a country and the UK, it is a country that has basically immigration has driven the existence of the country. There were people here before the Celts. The Romans came and went, but lots of that assimilated in society. We had the Normans, the Anglo-Saxons. So we've had immigration has been a key part of what makes of Great Britain. So why again? Is it when we talk about things like empire, that there's this almost embarrassment from people. They don't want to talk about it as if it's something negative. Susheta, as somebody who comes from India, which is a country obviously that was affected hugely by the British Empire. is there a different perspective in India on on things like empire? And have you found that being in Wales and the UK that you're surprised at how people's views differ?
Yeah, I mean it's funny and ridiculous that when I mean Britain, and no one should have problem with immigrants, but the Great Britain should be the last of all to have a problem with immigrants. And people often compare colonization with immigration, this on which is happening on a great scale. But people need to understand that colonization was forced and we didn't really have a choice, whereas immigration is pretty much a choice. And we have come here by all means that, and as we should, and we have as much right to be here as you do. And if anything, we are boosting your economy, we are bringing more money into your services. So but it's just pathetic, the reaction that we get. And it's again because we are visibly different. Because I remember Hugh, when we were talking in Cairo, and you talk to any person, they have traveled from somewhere to be here. I mean, immigration is the most natural process in the natural world, I believe. People do travel in search of better opportunities and for a better life. And why not? If they have the means to do so. Sometimes they put everything at risk and do it. So, I mean, it's only humane to let people be wherever they want to be.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It was last October the 21st. It was the anniversary of the Battle of Trafalgar. Which is a lot of people, especially the traditional English people on the right, going on about this is when Britain was great and all those things. And yeah, so under Lord Nelson, who is an archetypal figure of British and English culture, but the diversity of people who were involved, on the British side was incredible. There were people from all over the world serving back then. And it's this idea that multiculturalism is something new, because we had a nonsense with Sarah Poachin with adverts, saying that she's sick of seeing, black and brown people in adverts, which is, just basically, it's just basically telling people that she's a racist. So again, in places like Cardiff, and I know in Liverpool, where we have those sort of Newport, those Dockland communities, where we've had this coming and going of people of different cultures. So again, going back to places like Caerau and Caerffili, how can we, solve the issues in those places? Because I think obviously we need to talk about, educate people about immigration and the actual facts around it. But again, actually explain to people about this underinvestment. How do we do that? And I think, the Labour government's been in power for over a year, campaigning under change. But a lot of these people in these communities, and as I said, the deprivation index, the ones that are in the top, they've been there for over a decade. So, these people, it doesn't matter what political party's in power, they're just being left behind. So, again, going back to solutions, is there anything practical that can be done to help these places?
Sorry, I was cut off there. I was coming to it. That talking of solutions is, of course, important. We can't be beating around the bush and without talking the solutions. And pretty much a good starting point, as Councillor Davies also mentions, is to improve the access to service. That is one of the huge domains on which the Welsh index of multiple deprivation is measured, is to improve the access to service, improve the connectivity, improve the transport system. So we need to improve the connectivity between Bridgend and Cardiff so that people can get there more quickly and efficiently. I remember in Cairo, a bus day pass costing £7, which is huge, which is ridiculous. It's more than that of Cardiff. And the sheer number of buses is less, and which is problematic. So we do need to get there faster and quicker. And again, in the terms of Councillor Adam Davies, it's a cycle of disadvantage. One things lead to the another. Say we need to improve the health aspects. If not, people with poor health have more unemployability rate than, say, a supposedly healthier person. And given to this, their dependency on health on benefits increases, which again creates a cycle of disadvantage. And same goes for housing. We need to do better with retrofitting programs, and we have to decrease the fuel poverty, or because again everything goes up, the gas costs go up, the electricity issues costs go up. So we have to start somewhere, and I think a good investment in Caerau and other disadvantaged areas is a nice starting point, and to attract more investment and to attract more access to service.
Yeah, because Graham Dorr, who heads up the Caerau Development Trust, he was saying, that having a location where people can come in, and they need to come in just for a hot cup of tea, a hot meal, because they're literally unable to afford to heat their homes. And in a country like the United Kingdom that is so wealthy, it's incredible, isn't it, that we're seeing these situations. So again, sort of Thomas, thinking about that, is that an issue for people that you work with? Again, just about the quality of housing that they get access to and how it impacts on their health and well-being?
Yeah, it's a big issue. I think refugees are in the same boat as other people looking for housing. It is very challenging. There's a shortage of housing, and housing that is available is very expensive. So we certainly see people looking outside of Cardiff to find a rented accommodation, or even move in cities entirely. I think picking up Suchetta's point about transport, I think it's a really important one, because really, the valleys, there's a lot of housing there, and my grandmother was born in Caerau actually, and got family in the Caerau Valley, and I've certainly seen when visiting family that there is less and less available in those areas. But really, if you could improve the transport links and people could live in those areas and work in the cities, and it was easy to commute between them, then I think you'd start to see more actually investment in those valleys areas, because you'd have more families moving there, and there would be a need, and there would be a demand for services there. So yeah, I think the housing issue itself is huge. But I think investing in those transport links would be one way to tackle some things of it.
Yeah, and I think that, again, that was something clearly that came up from our conversations in Caerau. Caerffili less so, because Caerffili has got excellent sort of links into Cardiff. So you are able to get to places, but people forget that places like Llynfi Valley, the Maes Teg line, is one that was reopened, not that long ago, really, compared with the other lines. But a lot of people said at the time when they reopened it up to Maes Teg, it finishes at Asda in the middle of Maes Teg, that they should have carried on up to Caerau, and there was a tunnel apparently that went on across, because it's this interconnectivity as well, because a lot of people find it difficult to get around the valleys, because you have to go down somewhere and then go back up. So it's taking up a lot of people's time. So thank you very much, both of you, for contributing today. And sorry, a couple of our guests weren't able to join us for various reasons. But yeah, if you want to, I would ask, if you can visit talkingwales.co.uk, where you can see the film that Suchetta, Alex, and I made. And also read the article, the long read that Suchetta wrote, because it is something that is it's a real eye opener. But I think one of the other things we need to look at is, how do we get those voices heard? Because unfortunately we were hoping to get somebody on this morning, and it is, I think it is a big issue that these people from these communities, they're not getting their voices heard in the media, and I think that's something that's important. So yeah, diolch fawr iawn Thomas, and diolch Susheta, and hopefully you'll join us again soon.
Diolch,
you.
nice to see you too.
Well,
Bye.